You're listening to Everything's Canceled podcast with your hosts,
Herman
and Lorena. Subscribe to our podcast wherever you're listening to right now and follow us on Instagram at Everything's Canceled podcast. In each episode, we discuss topics in detail that could be triggering for some listeners, so please listen with care.
All content provided in this podcast is for general information and entertainment purposes only. This podcast may contain views and opinions which are those of the authors or guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any other author, agency, organization, or company. Any copyrighted content reproduced in this podcast is done so in accordance with Section 107 of the Copyright Act, allowing fair use, and is not an infringement of copyright. Information discussed is true and complete to the best of our knowledge. Any information discussed referring to specific incidents are allegations only, unless proven otherwise in a court of law. Due to the changing nature of laws, rules, and regulations, the hosts make no representations to the accuracy or completeness of any information in this podcast and will not be liable for any errors, omissions, nor the availability of this information. The hosts will not be held liable for any losses, injuries, or damage from the display or use of this information.
It is November. This is our second official episode.
Yeah, we're finally recording our second episode. We've prepared, and we are finally recording.
We've had a busy month. It was both of our birthdays and Halloween.
And we just don't have a lot of time, so you've got to forgive us. We are recording our podcast, and we have forthcoming podcasts that we are preparing.
But you guys seem to love the first episode. We got quite a response, actually, and I just got a message like 2 days ago from someone that's like, please put out another episode. I'm done listening to like what's there. I need another one. So
keep listening. We have more coming.
Yeah.
So who's canceled this week, Lorena?
Danny Masterson. I guess it's been a couple weeks now, but this week we're talking about it.
Yeah, we're talking about Danny Masterson this week. And so
trying to stay current.
Who's Danny Masterson? Who's that?
Danny Masterson. Hyde. I would say that at least Hyde, apparently not Danny Masterson, was a sweet first love of mine. Definitely a heavy influence of men that I find attractive. Like, I was young watching that 70s show for sure.
Yeah,
I mean, Hyde was mine.
We all know Danny Masterson from one thing, as Hyde from that 70s show, right?
Right. And he was everything that I thought was hot in a guy. Hyde was it. He was the stoner dude who talked about the government and smoked a lot of weed. He smoked a lot of weed. That's what we know about Hyde.
Well, his character did.
His
right?
character. That's what I'm saying. Hyde. Like I said, I was in love with Hyde. I was not in love with Danny Masterson. I didn't really know him from anything else, but I did catch an episode or two of The Ranch, right?
You've seen that?
I saw an episode or two because I love him. I was like, oh, like I got to see his next character.
I'd never heard of it at all until, he got canceled from that.
Yeah, to be honest, I actually think that I watched that while he was being canceled in the beginning when allegations came out, but I don't think I was aware. I think sometimes I selectively hear who gets canceled and I like avoid people I love. So this one I didn't really know much about the actor. Like I said, I only knew him as Hyde, but I was a huge That 70s fan.
Yeah, so you watched That 70s show?
Every episode, multiple times. Like, I remember the storyline. I quote it often. And like I said, like, Hyde is my favorite character, and watching his and Mila Kunis's character fall in love was what, like, I hung around to watch that. I needed to see that evolve.
I definitely watched That 70s show as well. I wouldn't say it was one of my favorite shows, but I was a big Simpsons fan, and That 70s show would come on like before or after it, and so you'd have to get through it. So I definitely watched plenty of That 70s show for sure.
Yeah, it was a great show. My stepdad quoted Red, the dad, like that was his TV dad that he really resonated with. So I often heard him, what's he say? What's his big line? I'm going to stick this foot up your ass.
Yeah. Classic.
That's
wow,
the That 70s show.
Yeah.
My stepdad fucking said that shit all the time.
90s, 2000 humor there.
Stick my foot up your ass.
Foot up your ass. So it does seem like That 70s show initially, I remember watching it and watching the first episode, and it seemed like initially the concept was that the show was supposed to be a show that was about the 70s and set in the 70s and had a lot of jokes about the 70s. But ultimately, what happened was the characters were all so entertaining and so kind of identifiable that ultimately the show became about the characters, and that's what made it so popular. Would you agree with me?
Yeah. Hanging out. They were like the people you wanted to be friends with.
Yeah,
they were your friends.
And so in preparation for this, one of the things that I did was watch a show that was on MTV in the 2000s, and it was called Making the Show. Similar to like Making the Band or Making the Video, they would have like documentary series, like half-hour documentary series. And so this one was about making that 70s show, and it was supposed to be like a behind the scenes of that 70s show. Because I was curious after finding out what happened to Danny Masterson. Should we talk about that?
Yeah, I don't really remember like when I found out. And honestly, I think it like when his allegations came out, there was a lot of other allegations of people coming out at the time. I remember starting to think like, post Me Too, it's very hard to keep track of everyone that's being canceled for sexual assault, right? So I remember that one kind of being a blur for me. I remember being like, oh, that really sucks because I love Hyde and I'm going to have like some feelings about watching one of my favorite shows now. Like what I had to sit in that, but then it didn't really like come to the forefront until this past couple weeks when...
Yeah, well, I mean, I can jump straight to the end of the story, I guess, which is that Danny Masterson was convicted of 2 counts of sexual assault and is now serving a sentence of 30 years to life for those convictions.
Yeah, and the 30 years was really striking to me. That's why I was like, whoa, because I guess you just start to expect nothing to happen.
So his trial, ultimately, he was accused by 3 women, and I guess there would have been 3 separate counts, of 2 of which he was convicted of, both which carried a 15-year sentence. So that would account for his 30-year sentence.
I don't know. As a woman, it's painfully obvious to me that most of the time sexual assaults are not
taken seriously,
do not result in charges usually. So yeah. I was a little surprised that not only was he actually being charged with sexual assault, but he got 30 years. That's just...
It was a hefty sentence.
Yeah, I mean, so I was like, whoa, okay, now I want to dive into this a little deeper. And to be honest, Herman over here is the one with he deep dived this a lot more. So I do, obviously I know what he's going to talk about, but I'm going to hear this for the first time with you because he was able to you have a gift for the rabbit trails of people that are oddly connected to people. And you were pulling names that I had never heard of or had to think about. And so I'm kind of excited to see like how the twists and turns of who is in Danny's life as this goes down.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of pieces to this story. There's a lot of similarities to some of the other stories we've heard. And there's a lot of similarities between the 3 stories of the 3 accusers who, two of which he was ultimately convicted of. And there are also several other accusers, too, that we'll also get to. But, a lot similar to a lot of these other cases that I think we're going to hear about, sometimes it's a little difficult to differentiate from one woman's story to the other because they bear so much similarity, because it seems, potentially because there's a pattern of how this accuser goes about what they do. And so you hear similar stories being told by these women. And another thing that I think is really similar to a lot of these other cases is that a lot of these women didn't know about the other women until they found out later. And then when they found out later is when they ultimately took action against Danny Masterson.
Yeah, you sort of get hit in the face with the moral decision of, do I put myself through the torture of the legal system and navigating how to get justice for this, which is difficult to say the least, if it means that I need to protect other women from possibly getting harmed and taking on that responsibility. And so when you have other people come forward that it's already happened, I think that there's some like feelings of guilt or remorse or fear of it happening again. And just, I think that it's like a very selfless thing. But we see that a lot, that once someone comes forward, you're like, shit, I need to help her validate her story by saying it happened to me too, while also preventing it from happening to other people. So yeah, I think we're going to see that a lot.
That definitely happened in this case. And so that conviction was handed down earlier this year, May 31st of 2023. And Danny Masterson is currently serving his sentence. But let's take it back. Let's go all the way back to where we learned about Danny Masterson again at that 70s show. And what I was talking about before with the making of the show, which I watched to try and get an idea of, well, what was it like on the set of this show? Because we've heard a lot about it and we heard a lot about these characters. And I think that there wasn't anything crazy that I found watching this show, no smoking gun or anything wild. But I think that what I ultimately took from it was that the stars of the show, these young men, most of whom, Danny and Ashton were both in their early 20s at the time. Some of the other characters were, the actors and actresses were a little bit younger. We know Mila Kunis was 14 at the time when she started on the show.
Which is, that's a whole thing that people seem to just... It's interesting because I've heard that fact many, many times. Mila was 14 when they started the show. And when that's brought up on the internet under memes or whatever, it's always just sort of like, well, she lied to, the people on the show. And it's never like, wow, we definitely know that the show was like very sexual in nature at times, obviously drug related. And we know that she had, physical interactions with the much older men on the set, and nobody seems to like want to unpack that as if she's responsible for that. But the people who made the show, she did lie about her age, but they did know at the time of signing her on her age, and they knew that she was 14 and she was being casted in a role to kiss these boys, have, somewhat very sexual relationships with them in the show, and ultimately having her on set with these older boys and the interactions that they had. So I was very interested to see how those characters looked behind the stage on this documentary too.
Well, this was a time when it would have been common for teenage characters to usually be played by older actors or actresses, which was the case as far as, Ashton and Danny's characters. But Mila was a very young actress playing a teenage character at the time.
Yeah, she was playing her age. I think like people are allowed to have whatever opinions they want on underage actors, like kissing and making out and groping. These older actors, like, it's acting, but I don't know, like, what's the line? Like, he's still like in his 20s kissing and groping a 14-year-old child, whether it's like a paid agreement or not. I don't know. That feels almost more like sexual exploitation to me, that she's getting paid to be like kissed and groped by these men in their 20s. It's fucking weird.
Yeah, well, in this behind the scenes show, one thing that happens really often is they make like this kind of running joke that goes on where anytime the production assistant has to go get somebody out of their dressing room, they will follow the production assistant. The camera will follow the production assistant to the dressing room, and they'll open the door, and there is Wilmer Valderrama, and that he is on top of whoever is the person they're supposed to get. It happens with Laura Prepon, and it happens later with, I think Mila does it. And then it happens again with Topher too. So, kind of all the characters. But it's like this joke that when the PA comes to get them, he opens the door and behind the scenes, the characters or the actors are making out in their dressing room. And it's kind of this very like 90s, 2000s, like make out humor. Like, haha, we're making out. You caught us. It seems fairly harmless, to be perfectly honest. But I think what it shows and what I ultimately took away from watching this like making of show was that it's very clear that the actors were the show and that they were so important to the show. They ran the show and they kind of ran the set too. There's a lot of Danny and Ashton like horsing around in their dressing rooms, jumping in and out of windows and just kind of being dudes, being young dudes who are having a good time
of their life at that time.
They're having the time of their lives, dude. And it's very clear they're having a lot of fucking fun,
Yeah.
And it's very clear that they get away with whatever the fuck they want on this set. And, maybe you could expand that to the rest of their lives as well on some level.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they were a set of friends to whatever degree on a hit TV show making tons of money at our best ages. So I'm sure they were on fucking fire.
And if you look up Danny Masterson now, or Danny Masterson and Ashton and Mila, there are a few things that people have surfaced, some like YouTube clips. There are YouTube clips from some old shows that reference kind of what we were talking about with, Mila being young and having to interact with Danny and Ashton on the show. There's a clip that's from a 2002 episode of Rosie O'Donnell where she's interviewing both Ashton and Mila, and they tell a story about how Ashton and Mila have to kiss in for an episode of the show, and that Danny, jokingly bet Ashton like, "Oh, are you gonna slip her some tongue? Like, I'll pay you $10 to slip her some tongue, dude."
Yeah, and I think that this is something where, like, okay, if I was a 14-year-old girl and I was hanging on set with no parents, with fucking Ashton Kutcher and Danny Masterson, both cute boys, there's a part of me that knows I would have absolutely loved every second of that. I would have been pushing boundaries and doing all of the things that, kids that age do. But Mila does voice in this weird way, like in that interview, about how nervous she was and how scared she was that this was her first kiss.
She felt like she was kissing a man.
Yeah, she felt like she was kissing a man. She almost sounds like she's unpacking that a little bit, but almost she reels it back as almost just like, isn't that funny? Isn't that cute? And like I said, I would have been doing the same thing at 14, but at some point you grow up and you realize, oh, they were the adults in that situation. I was underage. That's not okay. I don't find 14-year-olds attractive now that I'm in my 20s. This is problematic. And unpack that further. And she just does not. She has not unpacked that. And I think that plays a role in the rest of what we're going to talk about when it comes to this case of Danny. And I think that's why it's important to frame Mila in this way, that I don't think she's figured this all out yet.
A couple other things have surfaced in, kind of in the wake of this as well. Things related to Ashton and Mila. And another one was, I believe it was Ashton in an interview talking about how Hillary Duff and waiting for her to turn 18. We're all waiting for her to turn 18.
So after some research on the internet, I guess that actually is legitimately taken out of context, and he's supposed to be making fun of people who say things like that. However, it's very difficult to actually find that clip, and I can't confirm either way. But I'm just going to put a disclaimer here. It's possible that was a misquote.
Well, there's a few others like that, too. There's the interview with Danny Masterson on Conan O'Brien where they're talking about his Jersey accent, and he makes a joke like, "Oh, I'm Danny Masterson. You want to touch my balls?"
Oh, yeah, he's
kind of like a Jersey accent. And then Conan makes like a one-off joke about, "I've heard about you. They're gonna get you," or something like that, which is just right. It seems like it's totally just a one-off joke, but then when you go back and put it in context, it's like, whoa, shit, was Conan trying to expose him secretly? It's like, well, clearly not. It was just a fucking joke, but turned out to be a little different in retrospect. Yeah,
it didn't age well.
Well, it aged very well, I guess, because it sounded like he was
aged accurately.
Calling him out. Yeah. So should we talk about Ashton and Mila writing letters of support for Danny too? Because, we're talking about all their relationships. So maybe we should
Right. When I said that this came back a little bit more shocking after his conviction, 50% of that for me was his sentence being 30 years. And then immediately after, I want to say like the next day or so, while all of the links about his charges are being spread across the internet, I'm also seeing articles about what do they call the letters?
They're like character support letters.
Okay, character support letters from Mila and Ashton about Danny Masterson. And there are other characters who wrote character statements. I know that
a number of other people wrote letters in support of Danny Masterson as well. Not
Kitty and Red from the show.
Not just Ashton and Mila.
Yeah, but the reason that Ashton and Mila's letters were being criticized as much as they were is because, well, one, whatever they say they're wrong about because he was convicted.
Yeah,
and
they're
two,
writing letters in support of somebody who was convicted of doing some pretty horrible things. So it's like, oh, well, you want to stand behind him even though he did these. Well, you're not supporting his victims.
But even more relevant is the fact that Ashton and Mila have a sex trafficking.
Is Mila involved? As
No,
far as I
they-
know,
yes.
she's involved in that as too.
Yes,
I know
because he
Ashton was
started
on
it
the
with
board.
he
Yeah.
started it with his ex. Who's his ex? I get her mixed up. Is
Bunch
it
of
Brooke
'em.
Shield or is it
Demi Moore.
Demi Moore. He started it with Demi Moore, and then when they split up, she took herself off, and Mila put herself on to the board.
Okay,
So Mila
okay.
basically replaced her, and they renamed it to Thorn because it was named Demi Moore and Ashton's names combined. I don't remember what it is, but that was the old name. So when they split, they renamed it to Thorn.
Okay. And what is Thorn?
And Thorn is a program that is used by human trafficking, sex trafficking programs that help, right on like doing stings, doing prevention work, and doing aid work afterwards. They contribute to all those things, but they have a facial recognition program that is used to find people being sex trafficked on the internet, essentially.
Thorn is like a web app that, like you said, uses facial recognition software that they run on ads for sex workers.
And this program is used by most major human trafficking victim prevention systems. So the police use this program, the people who are the most hands-on with sex trafficking and their victims.
Yeah, so ultimately, Thorn provides like a data mining or like web surveillance tool that is used to potentially expose like patterns in ads that are online for sex workers that can be used to determine potentially if any of those people are people who are victims of sex trafficking.
Yeah, and while some of the aspects of the program can be criticized, it's mostly considered a good thing and used by
so
the police and human trafficking effort.
It's criticized by advocates of sex workers and sex workers' rights advocates because Thorn does not discriminate between people who are being sex trafficked and people who are legitimately trying to post advertisements for sex work.
Yeah.
So people who are not being sex trafficked can also be
potentially criminalized.
Can be criminalized by being swept up in Thorn's web surveillance activities.
Yeah, and
I was trying to get to have stings there because we know that for a fact, right? You know what I mean? We know that they use Thorn to set up stings to try and, catch people who are involved in illegal sex trafficking.
Yeah, and it works when you look at the numbers of sex trafficking ads that are on the internet every day in every town. It's like by the thousands, and this is actually catching people doing bad things. And whether or not it's also causing harm is like a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, I think that police and people who work to stop sex trafficking would say that Thorn is an important tool that they use.
I think it's here to stay, and so I don't think, any controversies over it needs to be, we have to find other solutions because it's not going anywhere. This is using facial recognition as how the world is moving forward, for sure.
I think that anybody could potentially see the obvious contradiction between Ashton and Mila, people who are supposedly dedicating to helping stop sex trafficking, writing letters in support of somebody who is a convicted sex offender or a sexual assaulter. And so writing these letters caused quite a bit of backlash from the public for them.
What I do want to say is that I do think that Ashton and Demi and Ashton and Mila have like fairly good intentions with the program itself. I just think that they're the most random people who don't actually they're not qualified really to be the people doing, they don't have a history in human trafficking help or anything of the sorts. They basically said they were inspired by how the media portrays sex trafficking, and they felt like they had the money and the resources to find some sort of solution. So that's basically, it came out of the kindness of their hearts and seeing an issue, in the media. And so it's controversial that they wrote these letters in support, but the fact that, people are saying it's out of character, I don't think it's fully related because I don't think they were actually that experienced or knowledgeable in sexual assaults, human trafficking, and those issues. I think that they were just rich and had resources, so they started this nonprofit, and they look great, and on paper it sounds great, but in real life, they're just humans who don't actually have the most valuable perspective on bodily autonomy and rape and all of these issues. So them being clouded by their friendship with Danny Masterson and wanting to protect him is like a pretty average person to do, because they're just kind of average people when it comes to their like sexual assault issues.
Well, and as far as the content of the letter themselves, they're available. You can read the entire letters if you'd like to see the details exactly. But they pretty much just go into detail about, I don't know, their history with Danny, what a great guy they think he is, how, what a great influence he's been on them. They never specifically refute the facts of the case or that rape by force ever took place that they knew about. One thing that they specifically say that seems kind of interesting is that Danny Masterson, the person, is, just so anti-drug that he was personally responsible for keeping them away from a lifestyle that involved drugs. Like if they ever went to a party as, young actors and Danny was there with them and they saw drug use, that Danny would turn them around right away and wouldn't let them, get anywhere near drug use. And Ashton specifically says that he credits Danny with keeping him from falling into that type of lifestyle of becoming a quote unquote Hollywood druggie. He uses that term, which is interesting both when taken in context of his character on that 70s show, who's one, a famous stoner, but two, when you compare that to some of the aspects of the case and some of the things that happened, because Danny Masterson drugged several of his victims, and that was like something that ties some of them together. It's interesting that Ashton and Mila would specifically stand up for him as, somebody who kept them away from drugs in their lives, but then at the same time, he was drugging and raping women.
Right. I think that their relationship, the three of them, is very interesting in a lot of ways, and we'll kind of uncover some of those layers. But they talk about, when we think about Danny at that time on the set, was he already into Scientology at that point?
I believe he's a lifelong Scientologist. I think his parents are Scientologists.
Okay. So, I think that like all the way back then.
And yeah, spoiler alert, Scientology is going to play in very large into every aspect of this as well. Danny Masterson is a Scientologist. Almost everybody in this story is a Scientologist. And Scientology plays a huge role in every part of this story.
But are Ashton and Mila Scientologists?
It's questionable. I looked that up, and it's like I can't find that directly answered anywhere.
Yeah, it's interesting because they just seem like maybe Danny is like their master.
I kind of suspected so, because honestly, these letters were the thing that made me suspect the most, because they really read as though like our boy is going down. And we need the Church of Scientology, PR department was like, we've crafted these letters for you to put your name on. And go read the letters, because they really read that way too. They read like a letter of recommendation for a job that comes from like a PR department or something like that. They don't come off super friendly.
Can I now get a little bit into, or what the connection is between Mila, Ashton, and Danny, and why there might be some loyalty there beyond just a friendship on the show, and that he was a mentor and an anti-drug warrior in their life? And that's like, can I spoil alert with Chrissy Bixler's Instagram?
Yeah, well, go ahead. Yeah, if you want to get into that at all.
Chrissy Bixler was which victim?
She's one of the three victims.
Okay, I don't know if we assigned her a number, but
yeah, well, she is. She's Jane Doe number 3, I believe, and she's one of the 3 victims whom the case that led to his conviction is based on. There are 3 victims, and Chrissy Bixler is one of them. She was Danny Masterson's girlfriend for a while.
Yeah, and she was on an episode or 2 of That 70s Show.
Yeah,
she wasn't a main character. I do remember a couple. I remember 8 episodes.
I have it here. Hold on, I have it here. I don't know for sure if they met on That 70s Show, but Chrissy Bixler was an actress, and she did play Chrissy on That 70s Show. She plays Chrissy on season 4, episode 4 of That 70s Show, Hyde Gets the Girl.
Yeah. So, just cute blonde babe.
She plays Hyde's girlfriend on the show.
Yeah. after all this was, said and done.
She's now, should we just go for it? She's also now married to Cedric from the Mars Volta and At the Drive-In, who will also play into the story quite a bit.
Yep, this is where I start getting lost on the...
Cue Mars Volta right here.
That's over my head. Okay, so Chrissy Bixler, when this is all said and done, and she hears or sees, it would have presumably been read in court, the letters, where she would have heard them there. She went to her Instagram and basically had like a fuck you on her story to Mila and Ashton. And like, what's very strange about this, she was just like, fuck you, you guys are hypocrites. Like, how could you defend this man and what he did to me? Because that's how she's going to see it. It doesn't matter what they said in the letters. It's just like, you can't give a good character statement for her rapist, So she brings up,
I know what you...
I know, she says, I know what was said between you and Danny that one night. I could take you down with this information. He had you on speakerphone and I was next to him. Like, I know your secrets, Ashton. And I was like, whoa, like, what the fuck is that about? And I was like, there's something like deep here. So I start looking into it. And
so yeah, what happened that night? What is she referring to?
So presumably she is referring to this incident where she's in the car with Danny and Danny gets a call from Ashton. And what was said in this phone call, like, I can't say for sure, but this was the night that Ashton's date, a girl he'd been on a date or two with.
Her name is Ashley Ellerin.
She was murdered by the Hollywood Ripper. And Ashton went to court for this as a witness.
And the person who found her, the first person to find her body was
Ashton. And what did he do after he saw her body? He called Danny. And so here's Chrissy on her Instagram saying, like, I know your secrets. I heard you on the phone with Danny that night. I could tear you apart. And it's like, well, what the fuck does she know?
Well, the man who was ultimately convicted of the murder of Ashley Ellerin was convicted of several other murders as well and dubbed the Hollywood Ripper.
And I don't know how far we can get into that case, but there's something like a little bit sus about that. But I don't know. I think that there's more to that story and how the evidence was dealt with. And I'm not here to say that it was actually Ashton, but you can let your own theories run wild here on your own. I just think it's interesting and a little bit inconclusive. But basically what happened...
His relationship to the murder is interesting.
Yeah.
He was both the last person to talk to Ashley Ellerin and the person to supposedly find her body. He did not call the police immediately. He called Danny Masterson and
right,
I believe his publicist, and then he went to a party, which was where he was planning on going to Ashley Ellerin instead of calling the police.
Ashton had met Ashley. I do believe they had been on a date or two before this night. This, I can't say for sure, but it sounded like maybe a third date situation. She had sex with someone else that day, and it was not Ashton. I kind of envision her as like a girl in between guys. She's casually dating multiple people trying the field right now. She's not serious with Ashton. And he's going to take her on a date. He's taking her to this Hollywood party. And he calls her and tells her, I'm running late. And I think she was kind of chill about it, like, no problem, I'm still getting ready. And he ended up being pretty late. He said he would be there at like 8:30 or something, I don't remember. And instead he was there at 10. When he knocked on the door, she wasn't answering, so he assumed that she got upset about how late he was and was ignoring her, or even just left and bailed. He didn't know at the moment. And then he claimed at first that he peeked in the window, or he had stepped, I think that's a controversy. Did he go inside or not? He looked in the window and he saw red on the floor and thought it was spilled wine. And so he didn't know what to do. And then come to find out, he did lie about those details, and he did actually walk in and see that she was dead on the floor. So immediately after that event, however it happened, he, like Herman just said, did not call the police. He called Danny, and he called his publicist and whoever else. We didn't really mention this, and we're just going to throw it in real quick.
Yeah, we got to talk about Wilmer too.
Yeah, Wilmer, who plays Fez on the show, whose entire character is just not respecting sexual boundaries at all. That is his whole character of like, he just wants to flirt with all the girls and he has no game,
and
right?
We're gonna have a Wilmer episode coming up because Wilmer canceled too. He
Wilmer's has his whole own episode. The
so
other
what
cast
are the
member,
things that we know about him? We know that Wilmer, he dated Demi Lovato, who was 17 when he was 29.
She wrote
I think
song
she wrote
about him.
something about him being a creep. He also dated Mandy Moore when she was 16 and he was 20. In an interview on Howard Stern, he claimed that he took her virginity.
He's gross, so yeah, he deserves his own episode.
Yeah, so
But
we'll get to that later, but he's associated.
The remaining character who is not associated, I think, with this is Topher Grace, Eric on the show. He's kind of like the nerdy, soft kid who seems like he's going to be a virgin for life, but then falls in love with Donna and they have the serious relationship on the show. He seems to be a little bit outcasted in these ways. He seemed to not really put up with their bullshit on set and didn't really fit in those same ways. And hey, he's the only one that I don't really have any awful stories about.
Yeah, it seems as though when you read stories about it, everything seems to say that Topher didn't really fit in with kind of the rest of the cast and maybe wasn't part of the scene, and ultimately it kind of set him apart. Just to go through the whole cast, Laura is also a Scientologist. Didn't she date? She might have dated Danny for a while. She's involved. She's around. I can't even. She's not important to it though, so I don't fucking remember.
Yeah. So those are his relationships, and we'll also get into some of his other personal relationships with his wife and family.
So let's talk about the three women that whose cases ultimately led to his conviction, and those three women are his former girlfriend Chrissy Bixler, Jane Doe number 1, who's known as Jen B, and Jane Doe number 2, Nisha Trout.
Are we going to start with Chrissy?
No, we're going to start with Jen B, because Jen B, I believe, was I think it's just first in the timeline. What happened was there were two encounters. Well, one thing that's really important to know about Jen B is that Jen B is a lifelong Scientologist. And Jen B is basically part of a friend group with Danny Masterson. They met because Jen's fiance played tennis with Danny.
Okay.
And so they're all involved, and they're in this kind of Scientology crew of friends. This crew includes Jen B's best friend, a woman who goes by the name of Bree Schaefer, who is Danny Masterson's personal assistant. It also includes Lisa Marie Presley, who will show up in this, also a Scientologist and kind of part of this friend group.
There's so many random cameos in this.
Yeah, there's just going to be a lot of interesting celebrity tie-ins. It also includes Danny's best friend, a man named Luke Watson, who's involved in the story, and his mother is I believe she's the senior director or the president or some sort of higher up at the Scientology Celebrity Center.
I hate that exists, but it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, the Scientology Celebrity Center is a building in Hollywood where a lot of, Scientology does stuff where they relate to their celebrities. I don't know.
It's just where celebrities can be Scientologists safely and not be in the public. Is that what it is?
Well, it's going to show up a couple times in this story, because ultimately what happens is, and this is something that ties all the women's stories together, is that after their encounters with Danny, whether they immediately are I was raped, that was wrong, or they kind of come to terms with it later, several of the women, what they do is, because they are Scientologists, is they don't go to the police, because you're not allowed to report another Scientologist to the police. You have to report them to your Scientologist higher up first. And so that connection to Susan Watson, Luke Watson's mother, who is Danny Masterson's best friend, she is the director of the Scientology Celebrity Center. When these women are raped by Danny Masterson, where they go is to get counseled at the Scientology Celebrity Center. That's the first place they go.
Right. I mean, I don't know if we need to say this, but Scientology is a cult, and a whole story.
We'll get into that. We'll have some evidence of that. We might even just need to say that so directly, because we'll have numerous aspects of evidence of that. And Jen B did ultimately make a report of the incidents that took place to her to the LAPD as well, not just to Scientology, but she did that knowing that she was going against the advisement of her counselors at Scientology, and that would ultimately result in them retaliating against her and labeling her what they call a suppressive person, which is somebody who's an enemy of Scientology. And in Jen B's case, because Jen B is a lifelong Scientologist and her parents are Scientologists, that means that in her case, her parents will either be forced to leave Scientology or to go no contact with her. And I'll give you a little spoiler alert, she is not in contact with her mother or her parents at all at this time because she chose to go against Scientology by reporting Danny Masterson.
Imagine getting raped by somebody rich and powerful at that, and then having to choose between the head of Scientology or LAPD to report your fucking rape to. Those are your routes of help.
Well, the LAPD report wasn't followed up on, because that was made in 2004, wasn't followed up on until all three women made their cases together in 2016 after contact with each other, and then LAPD had to attempt to locate her report from 2004. There were two separate encounters that took place. One of them was an encounter in September 2002. This was an encounter that took place before a second encounter. The second encounter was the one that she ultimately reported. So she said in this one, she was planning on hanging out with her friend, Bree Schaefer, who is Danny's personal assistant. She says they're at a bar. Masterson orders her a drink, one drink, the only drink that she had that night. She went over to his house later, and she said that she felt intoxicated. And this is a case where she willingly has sex with Danny. She says she doesn't vocally object to kissing or sex, but that at some point during the sex, she feels very intoxicated. At a certain point that Masterson flips her over onto her stomach and starts having anal sex with her, and that she tries to fight him off, and that she's like injured a bit trying to fight him off, but she's not really able to. She didn't know what to do because she had consented to some sex, but she wasn't sure if what had happened was rape. But she did end up telling her friends. So she ended up telling like a lot of the people who I just mentioned, who were like in their friend group, her friend Bree Schaefer, Marie Presley, and some other people. Another incident takes place later in April 2003. She said that what she did was she went to Danny Masterson's house because she had to pick up her friend Bree Schaefer's keys from Danny Masterson's friend Luke Watson, who was at the house. And when she got to Danny Masterson's house, there were about 20 or 30 people there. Danny gave her a drink. She said it was a sweet-tasting, red-colored drink. After she drank that drink, began to feel intoxicated within 20, I think she said like 20 or 30 minutes. She was thrown into the jacuzzi by Danny. She says that she was feeling woozy and she wasn't able to balance herself. And she says that she spoke with Danny's friend Luke, and her friend Luke was trying to help her, and she said that something was wrong. And then that was when Danny came over and told Watson that he'd help take care of her and took her upstairs. Danny insisted on taking her upstairs, where he took her into the bathroom, forced her to vomit. She said that Danny said that all the vomit was fucking disgusting and dragged her into the shower. I remember pulling me by my underarms and him handing me soap. Grab the fucking soap. He grabbed my hair and he pulled me up because I kept trying to sit back down. I don't remember soaping myself. She remembered being slumped on the floor of the shower. I guess I went unconscious or something. I don't remember. She says she's not sure how she made it out of the bathroom. Danny kind of picked me up and pushed me onto the bed, she said. And then she said I was asleep or passed out or unconscious. She admitted that her memory of the sequence of events was hazy. She said, to the best of my knowledge, when I first woke up on the bed, he was on top of me and his penis was inside of me. And that's when I came to. Immediately, my first realization was that's what I awoke to. She said someone knocked at the door and Masterson reached for the nightstand and pulled out a gun. She said he never aimed directly at her, but he was holding it and told me to shut the fuck up. She passed out again, and when she woke up, she was alone. Thinking she was leaving the room, she accidentally ended up in the closet, and she curled up behind a rack of shirts and blacked out. She said that Masterson was in the bedroom when she finally came out of the closet early in the morning, and he pulled her into the bed and told her to go the fuck to sleep. She said she woke up later in the day and went downstairs, and the only person there was Luke Watson. He told her that she should go straight to the office of Scientology Celebrity Center. but she didn't. She went to her parents' house instead. She did ultimately go.
Wait, so the guy there, his mom is the head of the celebrity center?
Yeah, who's Danny's best friend.
It's wild. So presumably he was telling her that to help her though? Like
Yeah, I guess so. Or, you know, he could
like
tell that something was wrong. So it's like, oh, you should go to, this is where you should go. You should go talk to,
which is weird.
Go talk to my mom.
It's just a weird, unexpected, I guess, because you would think he would protect Danny if that's his best friend.
So there's a couple more aspects to the story that I'll get through here. She said that after she, you know, kind of later concluded in hindsight that, you know, the sexual encounter, the first one in September 2002, that she told some of her friends, Lisa Marie Presley, her friend Bree Schaefer, and Luke Watson. And she said that all those people who were Scientology church members, what they did was draw up what are called knowledge reports on her. And she says that, you know, my understanding was that we in our group would write reports when we had relevant info about something that was not ideal. Counselors would then call us in, perhaps have us address why, talk about it, and take steps to fix what we did wrong or stop us from doing it again. She said that what happened was her ethics officer called her in to work on what they called self-induced issues. And she spent, you know, several weeks in counseling in Scientology for her self-induced issues.
Wow.
Because everything, you know, something that's important to understand is part of Scientologist dogma is that everything happens to you is it's like kind of like a karmic thing. It's kind of like karmic repercussion for things that you've done in past lives that are wrong. So like if you were to get raped or something like that, that's because you deserved it because you did something wrong in a past life.
That's so,
to my understanding,
fucking wild.
So I believe that would kind of explain
what if it's your first life?
Her counseling went in that case.
It's my first life. I don't deserve any of this.
And she said that, you know, she recalled feeling responsible for what happened at the time. And she says she felt like she put herself in that situation. She was drinking. She didn't have a plan. Her friend wasn't there. She didn't do anything to stop it.
I mean, that's a great solution to the issue of church people harming their inner church people. It's like, well, we'll just brainwash everyone into thinking that nobody can be blamed for anything.
She did go to report this incident to the LAPD, but it wasn't for a little while. It kind of took her a while for her to process, and she went and reported it to LAPD at their Hollywood station in June of 2004, which is a year after it happened.
And is she one of the ones who claimed that she's been harassed and stalked by Scientology now?
I don't know that specifically. That would be Chrissy Bixler, who has documented their experiences. So Chrissy and her new husband, Cedric, they've documented a lot of different types of harassment that they say they've experienced since coming out against Danny Masterson and against the Church of Scientology. On Mike Rinder's blog, who is also a former Scientologist, who has done a lot of work to expose kind of the inner workings of Scientology and how they work, along with Leah Remini, and he's done that on his blog. They've gone into details about things that have happened to them.
Something with their dog being poisoned.
So they've had 2 separate dogs that have died in suspicious incidents. One of their dogs was kicked in the head and died.
Fuck.
And another one of their dogs died after it consumed rat poison that was thrown over the fence, like along with dog food in their backyard. And they claim that it's agents of Scientology who are doing this to harass them because they are suppressive people. A number of other incidents of abuse too, which, like I said, those are all on Mike Rinder's blog. And she explained why she was reluctant to go to the police in her testimony, saying that because she was a Scientologist, and because Danny Masterson is a Scientologist, and because you cannot report another Scientologist in good standing to the authorities. And I just want to be clear that the church has denied this policy. Spokespeople from the church have denied that there is a Scientologist policy that restricts, you know, Scientologists from reporting other Scientologists to police, but that is what Jen B testified to in court. She said said, "My understanding was I would be immediately guilty of a high crime. A high crime comes with a penalty of expulsion from Scientology. You cannot speak or have contact or anything at all with a person who has been expelled or declared a suppressive person, and that would have major ramifications." And then when she was asked what those ramifications might be, this is again from her testimony, she said, "My life would be over. My parents, both Scientologists, would have to disconnect from me. My daughter, who was 7 or 8 at the time, couldn't go to her school anymore. Her parents wouldn't talk to me. I wouldn't have anywhere to work or live. I wouldn't have anywhere to go."
I think like with religions, all religions, there's things that aren't like policies in writing, and I don't know if this is or isn't, but there's things that are just understood in the community. And I don't doubt her fear, because I'm sure that there's something that she understood to be true, and she probably saw that in action in the church, people being, what do they call it in Amish community? Being shunned. Yeah, I mean, there's shunning. I think we see this in a lot of religions and cults, but I'm not calling this a cult, but I am.
You already did.
I did. I called it a cult.
So she said before she went to police, she did attempt to seek permission to go to police from the Church of Scientology. She contacted the church's international justice chief, but she never received any permission to report to the police, but then she chose to anyways. She said that after giving her report to the police, she was contacted by lawyers from the Church of Scientology, and she was visited by a lawyer from the church at her house in July of 2004.
Wow.
She was informed by the lawyer that there was already, quote unquote, a declare issue, from which was a report given by one of the other people who was one of her friends who she'd reported what had happened to. They had already reported her to the Church of Scientology, and that she was basically already in bad standing with the church. She was convinced to sign a non-disclosure agreement, and that non-disclosure agreement included her being paid out $400,000 over the course of a year.
Wow.
Okay, so I think we're ready to move on from Gen B's story to another one of the accusers' story, and I want to go to Chrissy's story. Her name is Chrissy Carnell Bixler, and she was identified as Jane Doe number 3 in the trial. And Chrissy's story is a little bit different than Jane Doe number 1 and Jane Doe number 2, who are Gen B and Nisha Trout. And I am using their real names here because that's how they're identified in other forms of media. Chrissy's story is different because she was Danny Masterson's girlfriend for a while. They met in 1997. They ended up breaking up around sometime in 2001 or so. They were together for about 4 years. And the charges and her allegations, she accounts for the 3rd rape charge in Danny Masterson's trial. Hers ultimately did not lead to a conviction. She describes Danny Masterson as a really abusive and controlling boyfriend. She describes several different instances where he has sex with her when she's unconscious or, without her consenting, and describes instances where he has forcible anal sex with her. These allegations didn't lead to a conviction because maybe there wasn't as much evidence, or maybe those are things that wouldn't have been considered serious enough by a jury to convict somebody of rape. But for purposes of this podcast and in our own personal opinions, it's very clear that that's rape.
Right. If it happened, that's rape. But what's interesting is, the forcible anal rape and all of that at least validates the other stories that came forward.
Yeah, and Chrissy Bixler, she's been the most outspoken about what has happened and about her relationship to Danny Masterson and what happened at that time, and about the harassment that her and her current husband have experienced since coming out against Danny Masterson and against the Church of Scientology. She documents that pretty commonly on her social media, on Instagram and Twitter, and it's an interesting follow if you're interested in following the case or following her story at all.
I think people paint her as like the angry ex, which is often tossed out in rape cases. Like, well, she's just the angry ex. But the fact that hers didn't get a conviction and the other women's did should validate that that wasn't part of the picture here.
Definitely. And if you were to listen to Danny characterize this story, there are quotes from him about how this is just his ex-girlfriend who is bitter and jealous, trying to get back at him, and that because this whole investigation didn't take place until Chrissy Bixler met Gen B and they kind of compared their stories, then found out that there were other women as well who experienced similar things, and then that's when the investigation started. So in his opinion, it's these conspiring women got together and conspired against him to bring him down. Of course, when you take a closer look at their stories, it's pretty hard to see it that way.
Right.
Okay, so we'll get into a little bit of how Christina characterized her relationship with Danny Masterson during her testimony at the trial.
And to add one more thing about Chrissy real quick, just a reminder, like she was the one with the Instagram post calling out Ashton and Mila's letters.
Yeah, that she has, kind of inside information.
Okay, go on.
Okay. Well, also important to note about Christina B is that she was not a Scientologist before meeting Danny Masterson, that after dating for a few months, he insisted that she become a Scientologist.
That's not a cult.
And she describes the relationship as being very controlling and Danny Masterson being sexually aggressive. She says that she woke up on more than one occasion to find Danny Masterson having sex with her. She describes one particular instance in November 2001 where she says that she started screaming and tried to fight him off and resorted to grabbing his hair. And apparently Danny Masterson had a rule that nobody is allowed to touch his face or hair.
Why?
Why do you think? I don't know.
You
could attempt to psychoanalyze that. I don't know, but that's something that several of the women testified to.
That's bizarre. I mean, I have thoughts, I guess, but I just never heard that.
Well, apparently in the process of trying to fight him off in this particular instance, she resorted to grabbing his hair, which upset him greatly, and he hit her in the face and climbed off her, spit on her, and called her white trash.
What the fuck?
She testified about another evening, also in 2001, that ended her with not remembering a thing until she woke up the next morning, and she woke up at Danny Masterson's house in pain and bleeding from what felt like a tear in her rectal area.
Wait, how did they meet again?
Well, I don't know exactly for sure, but they did meet in 1997. She was an actress who was on that 70s show. So I don't know if they met on that 70s show for the first time or not.
So she's not a random. She's an actress.
She was an actress.
In the Hollywood life.
She woke up with pain, what felt like tearing in her rectal area. She said that she tried to ask Danny what happened, and he laughed and told her that he'd had anal sex with her while she was unconscious, and that she was really traumatized by this. And so she attempted to report it to her ethics officer at the Church of Scientology. And she testified that the ethics officer, who is also a church chaplain, told her that she cannot be raped by a 2D, which is Scientologist term for second dynamic, which refers to like your husband or partner. And so
they don't believe in marital rape.
And she said that she accepted that for a long time. And she ultimately didn't report him to police until 2016. And this was at the encouragement of her current husband. Years later is when she kind of came to the realization in those conversations that not only was it wrong and something that upset her, but it's actually a crime that she was raped.
Just like a side note, it's such an incredible position to be in, typically as a man in a relationship with a woman with trauma, because we often think like, oh, you're going to have to navigate all of her traumas and triggers and all of this. But usually it's the partner is like kind of on a journey with her to help her unravel it. And that's such a vulnerable place to be in as a partner too, because now he's caught up in all of this as well. Like it puts him in a vulnerable position with that abuser as well.
I'm going to go into detail just a little bit more about Christina's testimony about her relationship with Danny. And she recalls other instances that characterize aspects of his sexual aggression during their relationship. She describes an instance where she's coming back from a trip to Paris in 1998. She says, I was really, really tired and jet lagged and sick, and he wanted to have sex and I didn't. And it resulted in a fight where he dragged me by the hair along the floor. He called me fat and other insults. That's the first that I remember.
What?
She said, most of the time I let it happen. I would get to the point where if I made an issue, he would ignore me for a day or two, where I would go groveling to him. She said that Masterson insisted that she join the Church of Scientology, which included her disconnecting from her family and parents because they were considered suppressive.
It always blows my mind when celebrities have to rape people when, like, they're famous, they can have sex with people that want to have sex with them.
She also describes her report to the church ethics officer that she gave in 2003. She reported that she had been raped by her former boyfriend, and the response was that the church officer explained to me that you cannot rape somebody if you're in a relationship with them, and that they also told her that she should not use the R word and described what happened to her as rape.
I'm just going to keep putting up, like, the red flags of why this is a cult, in my opinion.
And she also testified and gave a little detail about the incident from December 2003. She said, when I first woke up, I felt very confused, and I noticed that my whole body hurt. I noticed that I was injured. My bottom, it was red. It was not normal. It was torn, and it had a little bleeding. I was in a lot of pain. I couldn't sit down. It hurt to go to the restroom. When she asked Masterson what happened, he laughed at me and said he had sex with me there, pointing to her rear end. I asked him if I was unconscious the whole time, and he said yes. It broke my heart because I really trusted him. This happened in 2003, and she testified that basically their relationship was over at the end of 2001, but she did see him a couple times in 2002 and 2003.
And she was presumably drugged as well in that incident then?
No, she does not report to being drugged in any of those situations.
Why was she unconscious?
I'm not sure, but she doesn't report. It doesn't say anything about her being drugged, so I want to be clear about that I didn't read anything specifically about her being drugged. On the other hand, when we get to the next story, Nisha Trout, her story pretty much exactly mirrors Jen B's story. And it involves one specific incident at which she's invited over to Danny Masterson's house, has a single drink, becomes very intoxicated, and is then, she's in the hot tub with Danny Masterson. He throws her in the hot tub just like Jen B's story, takes her upstairs to supposedly help her just like Jen B's story, and rapes her. We can cover that in detail, though.
I mean, it may not have been reported that she was drugged, but she was unconscious during an entire anal rape situation. So drugs or alcohol seems more
like
than plausible.
Involved, but she doesn't claim specifically that she, and I think that's one thing that it's difficult to determine, because it's like, if you were drinking already, you can really only prove that somebody drugged you in your drink if you had like one drink that night and then you were shit-faced afterwards, right? Which is the case in both of the other two women's stories. The only way that you can prove it is like, I only had one drink that night and then I was sloppy. I couldn't get up. Because like, oh, God forbid you had 2 more beers or something before that, because then you can't actually prove that you were drugged.
Yeah, so maybe that's left out because there isn't enough evidence for it, and they don't want that to invalidate the rest of the details of the story, maybe. I don't know.
Like, I also just want to throw it back a little bit to this time period of, like, late 90s, early 2000s. Do we remember, like, what humor was like at that time, and how common rape humor was, and how common date rape-related humor was? And GHB, like roofie jokes, how common roofie jokes were at this time. Roofie jokes would have been common in like Family Guy and that type of shit.
I was a little young and naive. Like, I just would have never found that funny.
And then also, Chrissy Bixler she's documented a lot of things that have happened to her since coming out against the Church of Scientology. And we kind of mentioned the 2 instances where they had 2 dogs that died under very suspicious circumstances that they claim are both related to harassment by the Church of Scientology, that they killed both of their dogs. They also mention a time specifically where somebody who they describe as an agent of Scientology threatened to rape and drug her children. She has 5-year-old twins. The harassment that they've experienced is pretty intense and pretty wide-ranging.
This, like, the prep for this podcast made me go on a little bit of, like, a Scientology deep dive, and I was listening to podcasts. Did you know that the leader of Scientology...
David Miscavige.
Yeah, his wife is just missing.
Yeah, definitely another big mystery revolving around Scientology is the disappearance of David Miscavige's wife.
It's fucking wild. And like, is she missing because they just keep her captive and nobody has laid eyes on her in years and years and years. And it took so long.
Yeah, it's real questionable whether she's alive or not, right?
Yeah, because they did, like, her friend or someone did finally put in like a missing person report that the LAPD did nothing about for a long time, and then finally they just came out and were like, yeah, she's alive, like, we were told she's alive, or, well, like, it's very unclear, did they actually lay eyes on her or not? And none of her family, none of her friends has laid eyes on her in decades.
And so we'll move on to the third victim, who was represented in Danny Masterson's rape trial, and she was identified as Jane Doe number 2, but we know her as Nisha Trout, and Nisha Trout is also an actress. She was an actress on a TV show called Oh Grow Up, which is a sitcom that was on ABC in the 90s, 1999.
Missed that one.
One thing that's interesting about that is one of the creators of that show was a guy named Alan Ball. He also wrote American Beauty, which was the Best Picture in 1999. I think that's interesting because this film that won Oscars for Best Actor, Kevin Spacey, and for the Best Original Screenplay in 1999, it also featured nude scenes by Mina Suvari and Thora Birch. And Thora Birch was 16 at the time.
This is where we start getting into some wild cameos. Like Kevin Spacey, one of the biggest pedophiles in Hollywood.
And I think what's interesting is, like, when we look back at American Beauty now, it's often looked back on as a very different type of film. It was highly celebrated at the time. Like I said, it won Best Picture. It won several other Oscars, including an Oscar for Kevin Spacey. But when we look back on it, some of the themes in the movie are things that we look back on differently. Anyways, Nisha Trout, her story is very similar to Jen B's, but it really only refers to like a single incident in which she was invited to Danny Masterson's house after a night out with friends in Hollywood. They're drinking. She says that at some point, Masterson persuades her to get into the hot tub. She agrees, but she tells him specifically that she's not going to have sex with him. She recalls feeling fuzzy and that Danny Masterson brought her upstairs and into the shower, started kissing her and initiated penetration. She said that she was startled and said no, but then the next thing she remembers is that they were on the bed and that she continued to tell him no multiple times, but that he kept going. She described herself as feeling limp, felt like a limp rag doll, and that she also vomited in her mouth.
I can't find any photos of her.
I think that Jen was an actress as well. I know that Chrissy and Nisha Trout are both actresses, but they both make claims that their careers were hurt horribly, basically even destroyed by their relationship to Danny Masterson and the Church of Scientology. And ultimately, since they came out against both Danny and the Church of Scientology, that had devastating effects on both of their careers. I don't know how true that is, but neither of them have had much of a career after this, so
yeah, so I'm
there's
looking up
some truth to it.
I looked up Nisha Trout, which she's a little bit difficult to find considering that she was on a TV show. And I found her Instagram, and this is so interesting because here she is, like an actress in Hollywood, had been on a famous show and everything. She has 2,000 followers, and her bio is whistleblower and survivor, artist and poet, writer. And literally she has 60 posts, and they are all her amazing art. She's an artist, an abstract artist. And she has like one blurry picture of her and like 2 pictures of her daughter. She's definitely not like getting famous from this. This isn't truly, she's not like getting a lot of attention from this. And I can see that maybe she has not really had a career.
So, I mean, ultimately this trial did lead to Danny's conviction. This was the second trial as well. There was a first trial that ultimately led to a mistrial where the jury was hung in favor of convicting, but they could not reach a verdict. And so a second trial was ordered. And in the second trial, I think what really sets it apart from the first trial is that the judge allowed more discussion of the relationship between, how Scientology was involved in covering up these crimes, that Scientology in some ways was responsible for these victims not being able to or feeling like they weren't able to go to the police immediately and leading to, the delay in justice here. There have been several other accusers who've come out since this trial as well. One of them is a woman who claims that Danny Masterson raped her after a set party. I think it was like a rap party or some sort of party for people who were involved in the movie Dracula 2000.
Okay.
So I'm sorry if your favorite movie is Dracula 2000 and you really enjoyed Danny Masterson's performance in that film, and I'm now ruining it for you. Sorry about that. There's another woman who's an actress named Bobette Riales, and she also claims that she was assaulted by Danny. There's also, in addition to his criminal trial, there's of course also a civil trial that is being put together where these women are suing the Church of Scientology. But I see that Bobette Real is not part of that lawsuit because she was never a Church of Scientology member. But she also claims that she's been harassed and threatened by Scientology and their agents. She claims that she's been harassed and threatened with violence and murder. And she told a specific story where she observed a man in her driveway who was taking pictures of her house, and she confronted him, and he was was rude to her and very clear that he was there to stalk and intimidate her. And then later that evening, the bedroom window of her son was smashed. So she has a 13-year-old son, and the bedroom window to his bedroom was smashed. And I'm sure anybody who's a parent can...
That's fucking terrifying.
...speak to, how scary something like that is, where you have people showing up in your driveway, taking pictures, and threatening your children.
We continue to see, the victims of these stories continue to be victimized in other ways. It's not fun to be a victim. The idea that they come forward for attention, but this is the attention that they get. So we don't really have an easy segue into this, but we want to talk about some of the people in Danny's life, including his wife. And I think that the reason that this is important is because when we talk about rape culture and we talk about the communities that people find themselves in, is rape culture in every single community and that's why, or do people attract certain people into their lives? And I think it's kind of a combination of both. And I think that you'll find with some of these names that, one, he's attracting a lot of people that also have allegations against them for similar things, as well as vulnerable victims. Abusers attract people who will enable his behavior because they have some of the same behaviors themselves. And they'll also attract vulnerable women particularly into their lives, because if you've been a victim once, it's easy to remain a victim. We don't really have a lot to say on Mila specifically, so I'm just going to insert that here before we talk about his wife. But I think that, something I mentioned before is that Mila hasn't really fully unpacked how she's been kind of a victim in this Hollywood lifestyle of being an exploited child. And we often see women who are rape apologists, which Mila is a rape apologist with her letter trying to talk about all the good characters of somebody who's done monstrous things. And women who are rape apologists tend to be women who were victims in their own ways and haven't unpacked it. There's some sort of familiarity there or some sort of coping mechanism to see the good in people, right? We can get into that when it comes to his wife, Bijou Phillips has continued to defend Danny. I had no idea who Bijou Phillips was before this. Tell me about Bijou Phillips and her entire, because there's a whole history there.
So, yeah, if you follow the Danny Masterson story at all, or the, kind of the media around the trial, you'll see that there's a number of people who were kind of in his entourage or behind him or are still supporting Danny Masterson. And I think the most obvious person to cover there is his wife. His wife is Bijou Phillips, and they were married in 2011. And Bijou Phillips is notable for a number of reasons other than just being Danny Masterson's wife. She was a model, a young model. At the age of 13, she was on the cover of Interview magazine and Italian Vogue. She was also in a series of Calvin Klein ads in 1995. She was featured in these Calvin Klein ads.
Oh.
And I don't know how familiar younger audiences might be with these Calvin Klein ads, but they were considered extremely controversial because at the time, and you can find some of them online, basically they show young models who are clearly who are teenagers or who are close to teen age, and they're wearing Calvin Klein underwear, and they're posed in what kind of appears to be a basement. It's if you've seen the ads, it's kind of shag carpeting and wood paneling, and these young teenagers kind of posed in somewhat sexual positions in what kind of gives you the vibe of it's your uncle's basement type of thing. And these ads were widely criticized for being for representing aspects that people considered, pedophilic, or that, they were kind of reproducing aspects of the aesthetic of child pornography. And so these ads that Bijou Phillips was in were highly controversial.
Yeah, so I just Googled it because I needed to see this. And it's true. It's like they're like looking up girls' skirts while they're like have a finger in their mouth. And like it's a lot. It's uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and they're like in a basement. It's like, yeah, like shag carpet, purple carpet with like wood paneling like you would see like in a trailer. Very, yeah.
And so Bijou, as a teenager, was emancipated. She had her own apartment in New York City. During the 90s, she was known as a party girl. She was a teenage party girl. She was well known in the media for being a wild child.
Yeah, but like why she was a party girl is really relevant.
Bijou's relationship with Danny began in 2004. Apparently, they met at a poker tournament. They are both Scientologists. They are married in 2011, and they have one daughter together who they had in 2014.
Yeah, so his daughter is fairly young, seeing him go off to prison, that's been a big thing with these 2 episodes that we've done, where there's a lot of sympathy for the fact that they have young children, but I don't know, if a rapist has a young daughter, the sooner we lock them up, the better, in my opinion, but...
Bijou also is an actress. She's in quite a few different films. She's probably best known for being in Almost Famous, but she's been in quite a few different films as well. And one thing that's important to know about Bijou Phillips is about her family. And Bijou Phillips is one of the daughters of John Phillips. And John Phillips is one of the members of the 60s singing group, the Mamas and the Papas. All the leaves are brown.
And so he has another daughter.
Bijou's half-sister is Mackenzie Phillips. She's the product of another marriage. She's a little bit older than Bijou.
So they share a dad.
Yeah.
Him.
Mackenzie Phillips, in her book, High on Arrival, she claims that her father, John Phillips, began drugging and raping her at the age of 19 in 1979. John Phillips was known for having a serious drug problem, and she also did an interview on the Oprah Winfrey Show in 2009. And she claimed that she was in an incestuous relationship with her father, who was drugging and raping her for years until she became pregnant and didn't know who the father was. She was encouraged to have an abortion, which she did. Mackenzie Phillips was also an actress. At age 12, she played Carol Morrison in the film American Graffiti. She wasn't able to legally be on the set of the film for as long as she needed to, so the producer of the film, Gary Kurtz, actually became her legal guardian at the time so that she could film that, so she could play that character. She also played Julie Cooper on the sitcom One Day at a Time, and due to her lifelong drug and alcohol abuse, ultimately her character was written off the show.
Can I reel it back for a second, back to her dad, or are we going to touch on that more?
Yeah, go ahead.
So to reel it back a little bit on her relationship with her father. So in Mackenzie's book, she claims that the sexual relationship with her father began when she was 18. So she was not underage when it started. And it started when she had gone on like a party drug binge and she was passed out from drugs and her dad raped her.
She claims that it was the night before she was supposed to get married.
What the fuck?
And that her dad raped her.
And so Bijou Phillips made a statement about the book when all of these allegations had come out. And Bijou Phillips was 13 when her sister told her that she had, quote, a consensual sexual relationship with their father. And she recounts this news as being very confusing and scary because she had lived alone with him since she was 3 and she didn't know what to believe. And then her sister had changed her story a few times. It happened, it didn't happen. They both were sort of like left to be kind of party girls. They were kind of raising themselves in a lot of ways. This has been like a heavy load for Bijou herself because she's confused and upset, obviously had to be questioned on her thoughts and opinions and her own experiences with her father. And it's hard to be put in the middle of having to like defend your own relationship with your father. Nothing happened between us, but also have to like be there for your sister who's coming out with back and forth claims about what happened with their father. And I think that this plays a lot into her relationship with Danny and him being accused of drugging and raping women. And so again, just kind of pulling into this like character pull of, this is a really vulnerable woman who has been surrounded by men around her of drugging and raping women, and she hasn't been able to fully process and unpack that, and having to walk these thin lines of her own. She might have great experiences with Danny, so her being put in the position of having to watch him go on trial with these women. I sort of like, as much as I hate a rapist apologist, and I think it's her responsibility to unpack that, I have empathy for like her background and where she is now and in this marriage. She basically married her father.
Well, yeah, apparently there was a time when Bijou says that when she first heard from Mackenzie about her abuse by her father, that, she was initially supportive of Mackenzie, but she's kind of walked that back over time. And she now claims that, Mackenzie has problems and she doesn't necessarily believe all of her claims.
Yeah, but why do people have problems? I don't know.
And, Bijou, herself was, like I said, was very well known as a party girl. I think like younger audience might compare her to like a Paris Hilton type of like character like that.
Yeah, but she was living on her own in an apartment in New York at 14.
That's exactly how she characterizes it herself. She's like, well, what would you be doing if you were a 14-year-old who was making a bunch of money and had your own fucking apartment in New York? And it seems like she was living a pretty wild lifestyle. She claims that she lost her virginity at age 15 to Evan Dando. Heaven doesn't ring me anymore. Who is a musician in the band The Lemonheads. I know a place where I can go when I'm alone. Into your arms, whoa, into your arms I can go. He would have been 27 or 28 at the time.
Holy shit. She's literally been surrounded by dangerous men her whole life. It is so normal for her.
And she has another half-sister that we might also be familiar with, especially if you know the music of the 1990s, China Phillips.
Yeah.
And you would best know China Phillips as being 1/3 of the musical group Wilson Phillips with Wendy and Carney Wilson. And China Phillips is another one of John Phillips's daughters. Wendy and Carney Wilson are Brian Wilson's daughters. Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys.
What's the song? What's the Wilson Phillips song?
Hold On is probably the best known song.
How's that go?
I'm not going to sing it.
Someday somebody's gonna make you want to turn around and say goodbye.
China Phillips, also an actress. She was in Caddyshack 2 and Say Anything, among other films. And she's kind of important to this story because one of Danny Masterson's main supporters and somebody that was in his entourage, I guess, during most of his court appearances is actor William Baldwin, probably best known for his appearances in Flatliners or the movie Backdraft.
I literally know none of those.
They're from the 90s. He is married to China Phillips.
Okay.
And so they have been some of Danny's major supporters. At a certain point, it really didn't seem like Danny was necessarily taking his trial all that seriously. Bijou was there with him every day of the trial. And he even, before a preliminary hearing, he kind of posted a picture of him on his social media, or posted a picture of Bijou on his social media saying, oh, I have the most beautiful Uber driver dropping me off at school this morning, which is dropping him off at his preliminary hearing for his rape trial, which is...
I mean, he probably thought he just had an in with Scientology backing him up and his money, and he's gotten away with it for fucking 20 years.
And if you've followed the news of post-trial, you'll see that Bijou has applied for a divorce from Danny Masterson since his conviction.
Yeah, but it has absolutely nothing to do with, presumably, okay, I'm making assumptions here, has nothing to do with her views on the rapes themselves, and it has everything to do with asset control, because...
Well, because Danny Masterson is going to be named in a civil trial, an upcoming civil trial, in which the victims will be suing both the Church of Scientology and Danny Masterson, and so he could potentially be held liable there and have
So she'll lose out too.
Yeah, and if they're still married, so it seems that potentially her becoming divorced from him between the criminal trial and the civil trial seems likely that that's potentially an attempt to hold on to some of their assets.
Split the assets, and she can keep hers without having to pay out these victims. So it will all come out of his money, his half of the money.
Like when I was researching Bijou, a couple other like interesting stories about her came up too. There's one interesting story where people who've worked with her have had different types of claims about what it's like to be around her. And one of these stories comes from the actress Heather Matarazzo, and they worked together on the film Hostel 2, which came out in 2007. And she described on a podcast, an incident where Bijou, I guess, approached her. And at the time, Heather was, she had just gone to rehab for an addiction to prescription drugs. She claims that Bijou choked her and made a claim like, I'm going to make you relapse. Like some really odd interactions have been documented between Bijou and other people.
It's hard to like dissect that completely. Like I don't fucking know what happened there. Sounds like a fight.
Another interesting thing that I wanted to cover in regards to Danny's trial as well has to do with his defense team and who he chose. And I saw photos of his defense lawyer, and this person was immediately recognizable to me because one of his lawyers is a man named Thomas Mesereau, and he has this particular hairstyle where his hair is white and parted in the middle, and it's just unique. And he defended a number of other famous clients in similar trials. He is probably best known for defending Michael Jackson in 2005. Ooh. He was also a defense lawyer for Mike Tyson in 2001. And he was also one of Bill Cosby's defense lawyers in 2017.
Those are all future episodes, too.
Yeah, stay tuned.
Yeah. So, what's his name again?
Thomas Mesereau.
I guess we'll hear his name.
And ultimately, there was an incident where the judge in this case ended up fining Mesereau and another one of Danny's defense lawyers because they were caught sharing discovery with the Church of Scientology. So because there is an upcoming civil case that includes the Church of Scientology, it seems that Thomas Mesereau and another one of Danny's counsel were caught sharing some information with them that they weren't supposed to be sharing, that could, potentially help the Church of Scientology in defending themselves in this upcoming civil trial. It was enough that the judge, Charlene Olmedo, ended up fining Mesereau and one other member of Danny's defense team.
There's so much dirtiness with everyone in here.
Mesereau was retained by Masterson pre-trial, but he wasn't one of his trial lawyers. He had a different team representing him during his actual trial. This team included a couple different well-known defense lawyers, Philip Cohen, a defense lawyer named Karen Goldstein, and another one who's come up in our research a few times, a defense lawyer named Sean Hawley. Do you remember that name, Lorena?
Is that from Trevor Bauer?
Yeah, so Sean Hawley also was one of Trevor Bauer's defense lawyers. And Hawley has a really interesting background. If you've ever looked into Sean Hawley, they defended a number of very famous cases. They're a managing partner at the Johnny Cochran law firm, and they were the youngest member of OJ's defense team, known as the Dream Team. And they've defended basically everybody famous who's ever been involved in anything illegal that you can think of. They've defended Kim Kardashian, Tupac, Snoop Dogg, Paris Hilton, Nicole Richie. They defended Lindsay Lohan for her drunk driving and cocaine possession charges. Trevor Bauer, as we mentioned previously. They defended Rosario Dawson. What did
my girl Rosario Dawson do?
It was like an anti-trans.
Yeah.
What was the details of that? Where I have to come back and tie that in.
Wasn't her family mistreated a trans person?
Yeah, they had a person who I'm now remembering, Rosario Dawson. had like a friend who was living in their pool house, I believe, who was like supposed to be helping out around the house, and the relationship went sour for whatever reason. Ultimately, what did they do? They like said some rude things.
Said, yeah, who knows? I don't know.
I don't know. We're gonna have to come back to that one. But Sean Hawley also defended Shia LaBeouf.
Shia
LaBeouf, whatever. I don't know.
Shia LaBeouf.
And for assault charges, they defended Justin Bieber. And then a bunch of other interesting characters, too. They defended Elmore Geronimo Pratt, who is a former Black Panther, who was falsely convicted and spent 8 years in solitary confinement. Suge Knight, a number of other notable cases, very notable cases.
It's hard to, like, apply a blank opinion across the board for all of that, because they started out with a lot of slime balls, Michael Jackson, Cosby, but there's some names in there that, I don't know, maybe they were defendable.
Well, yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like they defend celebrity clients, but then also people who are political prisoners.
Big names, nonetheless.
Yeah.
Definitely the Hollywood dude. That was quite the cameo list. So basically this episode, we didn't really have like a wrap-up point, because the thing is, like, Danny is convicted and he is canceled. That's as canceled as you can fucking get. I don't know how people will feel, or how people are supposed to feel, when we have like a character in our hearts. I am a big 70s show fan. I'm a huge Hyde fan specifically. So, you know, I had to kind of sit in my feelings in that. And I think, like, you know, if you watch the show anymore or not, it's up to you. But I think that the natural response to this is, like, it's going to be hard to see him on screen and not be thinking about that. It changed how I viewed him. It changes how I view his character. As he sits there and says whatever, all I'm going to hear underneath is, you drug and rape women. Like, did you drug and rape a woman after you filmed this scene? It changes how I feel about that character. It killed the magic a little bit for me.
Yeah, I think there are a couple aspects of this narrative that really kind of tie it together to a lot of other of these narratives that I think we're going to hear. One is that this person had a pattern of abusing women, something that they were able to continue for a long time before they really had any negative repercussions.
Yeah, and I think we can also look at this and just, you know, sort of sit on the Hollywood culture here, like the idea of, well, everyone's getting canceled and this person and that person. We kind of look at, you know, like I said, abusers attract other abusers to enable their behavior, and they also attract vulnerable people so that they can continue being justified and enabled by their wives and their co-stars. And it's interesting because it wasn't just Danny that was canceled in this one. We also have Mila and Ashton's letters, but we didn't really talk about how they were canceled for that. They actually had to step down from their nonprofit. They got a lot of obvious criticism for running a program for victims when they were supporting an abuser.
Yeah, seems like a pretty clear conflict of interest there.
So yeah, you actually had some wrap-up points, right?
Yeah, in conclusion, one thing that I wanted to highlight was just the seriousness of Danny Masterson's crimes. Like, language is important, and the way that we talk about his victims and what happened is important. We kind of endeavor to be as accurate as possible, and you know, these things that Danny did, he's convicted of. These are crimes, and these are things that, you know, he's been convicted of and he's actually done. So we get used to calling people accusers and talking about their allegations, but the reality is that these women are Danny Masterson's victims, and that these are crimes that he's committed against them.
Right, absolutely. It could just be tricky, like, on our end, but it's always at the cost of the victims when we do that. But yeah, language is super important.
And so in conclusion, I kind of wanted to wrap up by tying this in to both Herman's 3 rules about cancel culture, and also just kind of by highlighting some kind of commonalities and through lines that are common in Danny's story that I think are common in a lot of other, like, famous abuser stories, and I think that we're going to encounter a lot. And so
before you get into your Herman's 3 rules of cancellation, we can pretty much deem this one a definitely canceled, definitely should have been canceled, fuck this guy, right? So,
well, yeah, we want to talk about the seriousness. I mean, yeah, there's, like, basically Danny Masterson's crimes were very serious. He was convicted of drugging and raping, you know, more than one person.
Yeah, definitely. So
What I wanted to get at was one of the things is that nothing happened to Danny until years after. And that's one of Herman's rules, is that usually these people are able to operate for a very long time before anything happens to them. These crimes took place in the early 2000s, and the criminal investigation didn't take place until around 2016, when the victims got together, when they realized that there were other victims, and they were able to go to the police and initiate a criminal investigation into Danny. And so, that really, works analogous to the way in which the whole Me Too movement itself started. And then this also really relates to Herman's other rule about how these are always an open secret. There are a number of people who know what's happening. And in Danny Masterson's case, that's something that is evident in a number of different ways. There's a pattern of abuse in Danny Masterson's case. He basically did the same thing to numerous women. And this is another one of those situations in which one of the incidents was reported to LAPD at the time. It ultimately didn't lead to criminal charges at the time. However that went. And, there's the relationship to also, something that's incredibly important is the relationship to Scientology, and the ways in which Danny's relationship to Scientology and him being a privileged person within kind of the hierarchy of Scientology made it so much more difficult, or in some ways impossible, for a significant period of time for anything to happen to him. His victims weren't able to do anything about what he'd done to them.
Yeah, I think how we can relate this case to the last case we covered of Russell Brand is that there is a cover-up, and that's why it didn't happen for so long. But the cover-ups were by different entities, whereas Russell Brand was kind of covered up by his own media, the production companies he was working for, because he was bringing them in money, and they really didn't throw him under the bus until they were no longer making money on him. Whereas in this case, the cover-up seems to be, primarily the Scientology church.
I think it's interesting to highlight the number of times at which the LAPD comes up as far as times in which crimes were reported to them that involved celebrities, and whether anything was done about them or not. And then also the relationship between LAPD and Scientology, or any potential relationship between LAPD and Scientology, and how that might be related to any delay in justice in this particular case.
Right. I was gonna say that, not just LAPD's relationship with celebrities, but Scientology separately, because we can see that with the case of what's his face's wife missing.
David Miscavige.
Yep. That's such a terrible name. I'm never going to remember it. Miscavige.
Yeah, Miscavige, Miscavige. It's really, it's hard to pronounce. I don't know how you're supposed to say that one.
It's a fitting barf name for a barf person.
So I guess the last thing that I wanted to say was to relate this back to Herman's third rule, which is about how celebrities usually suck. And I think that I wanted to highlight this because this was something that we were talking about before, and how we approach celebrities and celebrity cultures differently. As people who both say that, like I said, we're pro cancel culture on this podcast, we're pro cancel culture in the sense that we want to fully illuminate what their stories are, and then you can make some of those judgments for yourself. I have a tendency to come at it with, the attitude that I dislike celebrities, I dislike celebrity culture, and that they suck anyways, and that I don't care whether they get canceled or not, or sometimes whether they get canceled or not is a good thing because they weren't that great in the first place. Where
Lorena.
Yeah, Lorena. I couldn't remember your name for a second there. Where you tend to enjoy indulging in celebrity culture or celebrity gossip a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, it's still from a critical standpoint, but I just really love the psychology aspect of being able to look in on this world that's kind of real but kind of not. But they're people with real issues that we can apply to our own life over here. But of course there are many celebrities that I really love, as much as you can love a celebrity, and I'm a fan of them. Danny Masterson, I would have considered myself a fan of, and so as much as I hate, obviously I don't want them to do bad things, and as much as I hate to lose love for one of my favorite celebrities, I also really enjoy being able to open up the conversation and really figure it out. Just like a real life friend, if they're being accused of something, I want to hear all about it. I want to figure it out so I can know how I actually feel about this person. So yeah, I'm a little bit more indulgent in it. I do love the celebrity gossip. And we're going to talk about a lot of celebrities on this show that I really loved, that were really hard for me to like process. I definitely wept over Cosby, like there's a few of them out there that hurt.
Yeah, well, I think Danny is interesting because he's really only famous for one thing. He's a real one-hit wonder here. He's Hyde. He was Hyde, and you like Danny because, or if you like Danny, you probably like Danny because you liked Hyde's character. You thought that Hyde was a funny guy, seemed like a cool guy to hang out with, right? And so that was how we saw Danny Masterson, was as this particular character.
Yeah, absolutely. I happen to be a huge Hyde fan. John Stamos just got like broken down for me, and he was my Uncle Jesse. So we fall in love with these characters, and then think that the actor is them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I spill the beans of who we're gonna talk about next?
Yeah, why don't you tease, since have you started preparing our upcoming episode? And why don't you tease it?
So Herman here really kind of got to drive the car on this episode. He did the most research, and it was hard for me to get into this one because of all the cameos of names of people I wasn't very familiar with. So I just kind of sat back and was like, I'll be the listener in this episode. So next week we're swapping places, and I'm going to bring in the entire Smith family.
Hopefully next week. It'll take us another 4 weeks to get it out. But...
well, next week we'll be starting to dive in, I'm sure. So I'm going to cover Will Smith, Jada Pinkett Smith, and maybe a little bit about their kids and their family culture and their many layers of cancellation, from the Red Table Talk scandal to the Big Slap scandal, and whether or not I think they should be canceled or not. And I think that this is going to be an episode where we strongly disagree with each other, which will be interesting. I am a huge Smith family fan, like since I was a kid, so I've got a lot to cover. I'm hoping that he'll accept my perspective a little bit, but
it'll be fun to talk about.
Yeah, it'll be fun. And it's kind of a harmless one. Nobody was raped or murdered, and so we can be a little bit more lighthearted with our dissecting of their character. So yeah. Thanks for listening.
Hopefully we can have some fun with it. We'll see.
I hope, I guess the whole point of the Danny Masterson story was to just give you a good recap on the issues if you weren't up to date, and just kind of hear it from beginning to end. So I hope that you can leave feeling like you got the whole story. We'll see you next time.